So, hello, Gordon. Thank you for joining me from England. It's really great to hear from you and to have this opportunity to provide some real useful tips on how to present well when you're working from home and you have a lot of meetings to run on Zoom or even people to manage on Zoom, which is another level of challenge. So I'll let you introduce a little briefly what you do.
Yep. So my name is Gordon Mullan. As you can see, I was the founder of Effective Remote Relationships, but this grew out of my day job and a day job that I still have. I work for a large company called EPAM. We're about 60,000 people globally. And this all started, quite a few years pre-pandemic. So it grew out of working with remote and distributed teams. I've done that for many, many decades. The company I work for at the moment, the entire business model is built around the people doing the work not being in the same place as the clients. Mm-hmm. And I had a delivery manager who commented on the effectiveness of the techniques that I was using, and that turned into initially coaching fellow colleagues, then coaching some of the client teams. And I've since gone on to help people outside the industry and outside our business actually with these techniques as well. So I live and breathe this stuff on every single day, working with delivery teams, managing my reporting line, my kind of direct reports is all done remotely, almost without exception these days.
Wow, that's really great. So it's an additional level of stress, isn't it? Having to suddenly change method completely and manage a whole lot of different factors online. There's different skills involved, and just adds to the high amount of skills that managers might feel they have to, obtain. Let me just set up some basic statistics, as I was interested in remote working and how it affects people, and if it's changed a lot. We're in 2023 now. If it's changed a lot since 2019, when everything hit the pan, as they say. So I found a research which was done in September 2023. That's quite recent, by a company that specializes in pay management called Figures. And they said that 94% of companies which they interviewed offered remote working, but now it's becoming a lot less flexible. And I've heard that on the ground as well, here locally in France. There's a lot more restrictions on how many days you can do remote working, how flexible their time is. So I looked up another study which was done a little while ago in 2021 by Malakoff Humanist. Don't know if you've heard of them.
No, I haven't.
But they found that 30% of remote workers declared that it impacted their psychological health. Another study by JPG, which is a specialist in workspace organization, furnishing, how to organize things for the well-being of the company and the functioning. And they came out with a statistic that 79% of staff said that clear rules and protocols increase their effectiveness in remote working. But the worst enemy of all was just having a lack of clarity and communication omissions, things that were not said clear enough or in advance enough. So communication was a huge factor, and it was made worse by the fact that they were restricted to Zooms, restricted to certain times of day, not being able to access their managers or their other colleagues easily down the corridor, for example. And I know firsthand just what that was like, having managed team, having managed students online and feedback and team planning management meetings. So 36% found that they missed out this interaction. They missed out on it, interaction with colleagues and managers. So with all this in mind, you've found a solution to help these people. What steps should they be taking?
Okay, I mean, a lot of the stuff that you said there, and a lot of the challenges that many people, many organizations have had with the switch to much more remote and distributed work is because for so long we have relied on accidental proximity. You're just happening to bump into somebody or happening to know the right person to talk to. And even if the whole kind of increased shift to remote work hadn't happened because of the pandemic, that was always a problem and always a disadvantage. So if your management style relied on, checking that somebody was physically present at their desk, or happening to bump into them in the corridor, that is something that becomes very, very obvious when you move to remote work. So the first thing is, yes, absolutely clear expectations, and clear expectations for a lot of the roles, certainly the kind of work that I do as part of my day job, is what are the outcomes that you are expecting? it's not about physical presence. A lot of it is not about necessarily even being online at a particular time. Now, if you're in a support role or something like that, where you have to be available between certain hours, that's different. And there are certain roles that applies to. And actually some of those, like, call centers or kind of customer service teams and things like that, they can be done very well and sometimes better actually remotely. But for a lot of the work that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, it's about what are the outcomes? What are we aiming to achieve? And giving those clear guidelines so that you understand what it is that you're expected to deliver and by when and to whom. Another key part of it is making sure that you write stuff down. So much of corporate knowledge sits in people's heads and isn't actually written down. And if you're going to really take advantage of a remote and distributed workforce, you have to move to more of a documentation first, asynchronous first. So if you haven't come across that term, synchronous means real time, like what we're doing here, real time conversation. Asynchronous is more like you would get with kind of text messages and things like that. But moving to more of that documentation async first approach. So all the core knowledge is written down, is accessible. Everybody knows where it is. If you've got a question about a policy or how do we do something, there's a portal that you can go to or whatever to actually go and get that. So that's one part of it. But the other part that goes with that is, and this is why I call what I do effective remote relationships, because it is about building that human-to-human relationship. Now, within my day job, my company that I work for was built as a remote and distributed company from day one. So for us internally, the pandemic really made very little difference because we were used to working in that way. But we saw a huge impact on a lot of our clients who had been used to being physically present in the office together. And when suddenly they were all scattered, all at home, all individual, they're suddenly, oh, crap, collaborating and communicating and keeping up relationships and things is actually really difficult remotely when you're not used to doing it. And that's but I say all of what I was teaching started before then because I wanted these relationships with the people that I'm working with. And it is about getting to know the human and making what has been accidental, back to that accidental proximity, making those accidental connections deliberate. It's a little bit like the relationship advice that you get. Sometimes you'll hear about you need to schedule a date night with your partner. And part of you kind of goes, but we should be spontaneous. It should just happen. Particularly when you get kids or life gets in the way, that stuff kind of falls by the wayside. You have to put it in the calendar and make time for it. And the same thing applies to your work relationships, is making the time to actually build those relationships, to talk about the things that aren't work. Now, that may literally be a slot in the diary, or it may be an agreement, kind of a team agreement, that we will spend, I work in the software industry, so you may spend perhaps the first 10 minutes of your sort of bi-weekly retrospective meeting just playing some games together or doing some activities that help you get to know each other. And I've got a whole bunch of what you might label as icebreaker type activities, but they're actually relationship building activities that help you build up that relationship and keep that sense of closeness and hopefully a bit of fun and enjoyment, and also recognizing that you're working in, certainly in my case, with lots of people from different cultures, different time zones, different backgrounds, and actually taking the time to get to know a bit about that, to acknowledge those differences, to celebrate them. So, you might say, well, if it's Diwali or whatever the particular holidays, let's celebrate that, or let's, if you've got a particular national costume that you wear, we work with a lot of Ukrainians, kind of half our company was based out of there, and they have their national costumes and they would wear those. So these all sound, it's easy to look at these as kind of small, trivial things that get in the way of real work. Mm-hmm. But we do the best work for people that we know, like, and trust, that we built a relationship with. You will go the extra mile for somebody that you feel cares about you. Yeah. So you have to make that deliberate. Yeah. You have to put that in, and there's lots of activities and things that you can do, which can be fun, but help build that sense of connectedness and keep you connected as a team and as an organization.
So that's really interesting, because there's a difference between people who've been used to working with each other beforehand and have a strong connection already, and those who suddenly joining a company, or those who may be joining a company in a branch which is in a totally different country.
Mm.
So those ideas can really help people to connect or to create their first connection ever with those people, say, in a different culture. So what activities would you suggest for people who, say, an English person wants to connect with an Indian person?
Okay. Well, in terms of people joining the organization, have a really clear, structured onboarding process. Again, this goes back to this whole sort of documented async first kind of approach, is everybody goes through the same sequence. Yes, there may be some elements that are different depending on the role that you're doing, but there should be an onboarding into the company culture. So some of that will be, sort of written, some of it may be video, but what's an important part of that is connect them with and assign them a buddy, somebody who's already embedded in the organization. You will know who these people are in your organization. They're the people that everybody reaches out to. They're kind of everybody's friend, or if you want to know who to talk to, that's the person you go and see. Ask people, would you be willing to be a buddy for new people joining? And you will find there will be people in your organization, and I'm one of them, will stick that in and go, yeah, very happy to. Doesn't necessarily take a lot of time, but that person feels they've always got somebody they can talk to. And you can schedule, kind of a regular, even if it's only sort of 15 or 30 minutes every couple of weeks, just to check in and go, how are you? And it's not necessarily a line manager relationship. I've got a mix of that. I've got some people that I do that with that are my direct reports, but I've got others that aren't. And helping connect them to other people in the organization, or if they've got, they're looking to go in a particular direction, well, I can connect you with this person because I know that they'll be able to support you and answer some questions for you. But just feeling that you've actually got that relationship. So that company culture aspect, again, can be done remotely. The same in my day job, 60,000 people. We get a lot of people join. We do this on a regular basis. I help do it with the people that join our part of the organization in the UK. So if you are going back to your specific question, though, about sort of UK versus Indian, I always, and I'm going to be slightly careful with this one, I always believe that it is better to be able to see the person that you're talking to. So encouraging people to turn a camera on, and on a one-to-one conversation, you're much more likely to get people to do that. When it's a big kind of group meeting, there's a tendency for a lot of people just to turn their cameras off. I still try and encourage it, but it's more difficult. But you do have to respect that depending on where they are, and they may be working from home, they may not be comfortable about showing the environment that is around them. There are things that you can do. There's places that you can find to sit, or I've seen people have, kind of the folding screens that you would sort of undress behind. Just small ones of those kind of folded out behind your chair wherever you're sitting. Doesn't necessarily take up a lot of space, but it blocks what's behind you. And obviously you've got virtual backgrounds as well, which is another option. But take an interest. But one of the things that I've found is really, really powerful and demonstrates right from the very off that you care about the culture and the differences is people's names, which is the name that comes up on screen on Teams or Zoom is very often the person's full legal name. And it's not necessarily the name they use on a day-to-day basis. And this applies to all cultures. So William could be Will or Bill. Rebecca could be Becky, but she might actually hate that and prefer to be called Rebecca. But if you're talking about foreign cultures, particularly sort of Indian, Ukrainian, all of those, Russian, whatever the names are that you're working with, is the simple question of, what would you like me to call you? What would you prefer me to call you? And I've found I have to add the rider, and please don't give me the easy anglicized version. Yes. So I'll give you a kind of Ukrainian example. So it's spelled Yevhenii, and there's lots of variations, but that's kind of Yevgeny. It quite often gets anglicized to Eugene, which is to me a sort of horribly Americanized version. The actual short form that a lot of them prefer is Zhenya. It's not that difficult. So Alexander could be Sasha. A Natalia might actually be called Natasha, or a Daria might be Dasha, whatever it is. Just ask, what would you prefer? What do your friends call you? Is quite often the way I'll phrase that question, because suddenly I feel seen. Somebody cares. Because for Western cultures, a lot of the time, all right, your name might have some history to it. It might be your grandparents' name or something like that. But for a lot of other cultures, kind of particularly the further east you go, I tend to find there's often a huge amount of historical, social, familial significance to the name. So using that name and respecting that and making the effort, because I have the luxury of speaking in English all day. I don't have to speak a second language, but many of my colleagues are speaking in a second, third or fourth language. The very least I can do is make the effort to get their name right, you know, and actually prepare that. If English people can manage Schwarzenegger and Tchaikovsky, all right, they can manage Zhenya or Dasha or whatever.
Yeah. So what can you do if you're a manager and you have a larger group of people, but you want to get connection with each one of them? You know, these informal meetings that take place down the corridor or the coffee room. How can you help the managers to find a technique connecting with those that they manage at a distance, say different teams of sales managers?
Well, first of all, if they are people you are directly responsible for, you should be doing one-to-ones with them anyway. I would sincerely hope you were doing those, you know, when you were physically present with them. So switch that to being virtual, turn your camera on, and learn how to use the tools that you've got effectively. So again, it goes back to a small thing. More people have cottoned onto this than did initially. But when you're on a video call, the eyes of the person that you're talking to are not the eyes on the screen, it's the camera. And it makes a huge difference to how you are perceived, because typically for most people using a laptop, the camera is above the screen. Now, if I was talking to you in real life and I spent my whole life talking to you here, now bear in mind, you are female. Subconsciously, you may not have thought about this consciously, but where does it feel like I'm looking when I'm talking to you like this? There's a little unconscious bit at the back of your brain goes, I feel a bit uncomfortable and I don't understand why. But also if somebody is looking down and not making eye contact with you, now I have ADHD, so I understand the neurodivergent aspect of this, and some people struggle with eye contact anyway. But rightly or wrongly, for a lot of people, if somebody's talking to you and won't meet your eye, you think they're nervous, shy, untrustworthy, lots and lots of negative associations. So if you want the person you're talking to feel like you are connecting with them, is look at the camera. You can obviously kind of bounce between the two, as I'm doing, you know, just to kind of check the facial responses and look at the person I'm talking to. You don't just stare down the camera the whole time. But if you never look at the camera, or if even worse, you're spending the entire time talking to somebody over here and they're actually over there, again, that breaks that feeling of trust and connectedness,
which you would get in a face-to-face meeting.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you'll notice as well that the position that I'm sitting, you can see me from kind of mid-chest up over, which is about what you would see if you were sitting across the table from me. It's small sort of subtle things like that just help it feel more like we're sitting across the table from each other rather than sat, you know, a few hundred miles away in the country or halfway around the world. My entire family emigrated to New Zealand. If I want to maintain, and I do obviously, maintain a close personal relationship with my own family, that is done almost exclusively through video calls. Yeah.
So have you got any other last tips, really important things that people can do or resources they can go off and study?
Oh, there are lots and lots of really good people in kind of the remote working space. So obviously, I mean, I've got my own small YouTube channel. There's some videos on there that people can take a look at. But a couple of good names to look at would be a lady called Lisette Sutherland, Liette Sutherland. So she's really good. I will find one or two others to send you to. She's the first one that jumps to mind. But yeah, there's some really, really good people in that space. And yeah, just have a look at those kind of techniques, particularly for the remote work aspect. There's lots of great suggestions, you know, perhaps even one, I think was Lizette's actually, your own personal user manual. Everybody writes how I work best, how you would work best with me. And again, that's something that's published and available. So you can reference that and what's their preferred method of communication, team agreements. You know, when do we expect people to be online? How fast do we expect them to respond? But again, all of this comes back to agreed, documented, clear policies, understanding, expectations, and then you don't have that uncertainty, and you alleviate a lot of that stress.
Yeah, so yeah, eliminates a lot of the fear factor as well.
Yeah.
And the feeling after a meeting that, oh, I wish I'd asked this, or I wish they'd been a bit more clear, they've missed so and so. So yeah, preparing the meeting, I imagine, is quite important as well.
Yeah, lots of things that are just good practice anyway become even more important when you're trying to do them remotely.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks very much, Gordon, for those tips to get people thinking a bit more on the clarity side, communication, and just being aware of the other person's need on the other side of the camera as well. That's just so helpful.
Yeah, be human, Gordon. And remember it's a human on the other end. And
I'll make sure that I put the link to your site and your YouTube below the video so they can look further on for it.
All right, okay. Lovely. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Gordon. Nice to meet you.
Take care. Bye-bye.